Hi everyone. Thanks for coming along. I don't know if we still might have a couple dropping in after lunch, but we're losing daylight, so I thought I'd bash into it. So, my name is Fionn Finegan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer, COO of a company called TutorCruncher, which should also probably be on the slide. A bit about me and why I'm talking to you. So TutorCruncher, as a lot of the people in this room probably already be aware of, we provide management software to tutoring companies. So we try to be like a one-stop shop, an all-in-one solution for all the different software tools that tutoring companies, like many of yourselves, will need to run their businesses. And in terms of some of the framing or why I'm talking to you about this and the perspective I come at it from, there's lots individually about tutoring that I don't have great oversight on. I'm a software guy, I sell a software product, and so you can ask me about questions that come up on the 11 Plus and I'm not going to have a clue. What we do though is we do talk to about 50 odd tutoring companies every month, and the way I and the rest of the sales team approach that is we talk to them, what is your business model? We find that out. Talk to them exactly how they run their business, what are the pain points, what do they want to happen, and then we provide some suggestions for software solutions depending on what they've told us. And I've been doing that, as I said, like 50 companies a month with brand new conversations, and that's over the last 6.5 odd years. So that's really not great at the specifics, but it gives a really nice overview, a nice bird's eye view of what's going on in the industry as a whole. And so what I've tried to do today, and what I'm going to be talking about, is kind of like a demo, right? I'm going to start with a few business models and try to map on some software solutions that I see people using for them, make some suggestions as to what you might use. But I can't use your business model because we'd be here all day. So what I'm doing instead is trying to kind of pull out a few of the more common business models that I see in the UK specifically at the moment. And also as a bit of an introduction, I might talk about what the old business model kind of used to be and how it's changed, mostly in relation to, I think the big thing has been the 2020 employment agency legislation stuff. So I'm talking about them as models rather than, I know Tutor Association did a lot of great stuff on the legal requirements, not really my intention to wade into, but as a model, employment agencies, employment businesses and stuff, how does it all map out, and how does it map onto software? So first off, as I said, the kind of old way of running a tutoring company, there was like a kind of a classic model that I used to see all the time in the UK. So it was a provider of a very managed, high-value ad service, so really hands-on, really guiding people through the process, including things like tutor-student matching, onboarding interviews for students, a lot of CV sharing, and like closely managed relationships in that way. A lot of the value add was on invoicing and like curated invoicing relationships. A lot of people defaulted to arrears invoicing, payment at the end of the month. That was partly because of what was understood to be the legislative environment back at the time, and also partly because it lent itself to that like nice curated managed impression of a company. And those companies were, and this is pre-2020, operating as what was then considered employment agency. So I'll go into in just a sec what I mean by that. So brief overview here, and again, not talking, not going to wade into a load of legal stuff. A lot of you will be familiar with this already, so I'll just gloss over it very quickly. Employment agency, it's a regulated business model for tutoring companies in the UK. It's an alternative to operating as an employment business. So I'm going to keep using EA and EB throughout this conversation. And it's multifaceted, so I don't want to give the impression that I'm reducing it to certain dimensions, and I'm sure John Nichols wouldn't want me doing that either. He's been great at like keeping people on board as exactly what it means in terms of legislation. So it has implications in terms of tutor control over the billing process that we're going to talk about. I've highlighted one here just because it's cost and it's money, and it's always going to be a factor, but it is just one factor, and that's what we have on the right-hand side here. So this is the breakdown in what either an employment business, EB, or an employment agency, EA, would have to charge for what ostensibly might seem like it should be the same lesson, right? So we've got a tutor pay. In both cases, it's £80. We've got a company commission on top of that at £20. And in the employment business, the recognition of revenue is the full £100 of the 80 for the tutor plus the 20 for the agency. So VAT is calculated on that at 20%. I am speaking to a room full of tutors, 100 plus 20%, you've got 120, that's no problem. The employment agency model, the costs associated with that is we've got £80 to the tutor, £20 to the company, just like we did before, but now the revenue recognition for the company is on the £20 commission, not on the full 100, and 20% of 20 is the £4, so the total charge to the client is 104 in that case. So you can see that's one factor that people obviously are going to be thinking about when it comes to EA and EB, and that's like a driving force as to what prompts a lot of these conversations. And the way they can... Yeah, sure. So they have to be self-employed if you're acting as an employment agency, but actually an employment business can have self-employed tutors too. So I know employment business... Yeah, it sounds like employment business sounds like you should be employing them. Definitely room for confusion there. But yeah, they can be, employment business can be both, but you can't have employed tutors if you're an EA. And actually also, the model I describe here is assuming that the tutor themselves, because they're independent contractors, isn't VAT registered. If they were VAT registered, which they won't be in 99.9% of situations, then they'd have to charge VAT on their own stuff as well, in which case it works out as being the same as the employment business. So 2020 was our inciting incident. It was High Court ruling EWHC 2461, which comes up on our sales calls a lot and slows them down slightly. There were lots of ramifications of that decision, but a fairly core one was the fact that employment agencies must not be in control of the flow of funds to the tutor. So that was a big deal, and it concerned people a little bit at the time. It was a big kind of concept shift, and it's been a couple of years now since it's come into effect, into force, and in response to it, I have perceived like a little bit of a dieback of that old classic model of like what a UK tutoring company used to look and feel like, and three kind of models have sprung up in its place, or 2.5 or something, we'll see. First, just a bit of clarification on what I'm going to be assuming a little bit throughout the rest of this, which is that TutorCruncher developed a solution to that employment agency model, which allows, it's called split payments, and it allows the tutor to receive their funds directly from client payment. It basically facilitates the requirement, which we just mentioned there, about the tutoring company not being in control of the flow of funds. So, traditionally speaking, what would have happened was that the client payment would have gone straight to the company. So like top of the pyramid to bottom left, and then the company would have paid some percentage of it out to the tutor at some later date. That was what was deemed to be non-acceptable for employment agencies. So what TutorCruncher developed as an alternative for that is TutorCruncher and Stripe kind of working together. We take the client payment initially, and then at the moment it's taken, it's automatically split between the company and the tutor. So the tutor's money never sits in the company's account, it's split automatically, and that was deemed in adherence with what was then BIS's rules for how employment agencies should operate. So that's the kind of framework. Was there any question on that? Yeah? Several tutors, we do it on like a per lesson basis. So as long as the total for a lesson is higher than the total payment to a tutors, obviously if total payment for tutors exceeds total payment from clients, then we can't do it. But otherwise we just kind of divide one by the other, if that makes sense.
You know how you said before, old model, they paid in arrears to the client?
Yeah.
Now, usually they pay in advance, aren't they?
If they're acting as an employment agency, no, there's still arrears. Yeah, we can't do upfront payment with this model without simultaneously paying the tutor. Yeah.
When they clock in and say, right, we've done that lesson, and then it generates.
Yeah, so this model that we brought out doesn't support the upfront stuff for the same reason that you suggest, which is it makes it complicated. You're paying for someone for work they haven't done yet. Yeah, exactly. And then when it doesn't happen, things get confusing. But other than those conversations, this flow satisfies those requirements. So I kind of assume that going forward with the solutions, when I talk about employment agency, it's not the only legal way to do it. Tutors could take the full amount for the lesson from the client and then pay it on to the agency afterwards. That would satisfy it. Or the client could be charged separately on separate invoices from both the tutor and the company. But I'll lean in with this just because it's less messy, and it's the only software product that's been designed for this that at least I'm aware of. So, in terms of how that changed the landscape in tutoring, there are 3 business models that I perceive as, being the kind of new main ones. We got clustered around identifying as an employment agency, identifying as an employment business, and identifying as a hybrid of the two. So you can do both things at the same time. You don't have to be one or the other. In terms of employment agency, so highly managed services become a little bit more complicated because the framing here is, we talked about that old example of a tutoring company. High value add, providing lots of services. One of the stipulations of this EA model is that if you're providing a lot of value add services on top, they have to be separated on the invoice, and clients have to know the flow of funds, so they're going to see exactly what they're paying for tutoring to a tutor versus what they're paying on top of it to the agency. Doesn't mean that you can't add services on top, but the justification for them becomes a lot more kind of pressing, and maybe they become slightly more difficult conversations to have. The benefits, obviously, as you will have seen previously, lower cost to clients, right? So this is the £104 option as opposed to the £120 option. There are significantly lower admin overheads, and I was just having a conversation with someone here outside who was saying that they've really recognized this, and we keep hearing it. You're not doing invoicing, you're not doing payroll. The tutor is in control of the invoicing process, so they trigger when the invoice sends. And that triggers their payment as well. So all of a sudden, those jobs are off your plate. Similarly, you get way lower payment delinquency. That's something I keep hearing from people, is that previously they had maybe one person or 2 people on an accounting team who followed up late payments. Now you've got, how many tutors do you have? You have that number of people who chase late payments because each one of them can see on their own dashboard for every lesson they taught, when was it paid? And if it's not paid, they have a direct line to the client and they can say, hey, I'm sorry, could you help me out here, please? And when they do it, they have a relationship. The client knows them, they like them, and maybe had it been someone on your accounting team, maybe those are the only interactions they have with them, or a phone call where we say, could you pay your invoice? So really much lower payment delinquency rates, and that's a really big issue. Yeah? You can't do split payments. We haven't set up split payments with GoCardless. So if you wanted to do that, you'd have to do like one of the, what I'll call like offline approaches that I described earlier, where like tutor takes the full amount or you charge the client separately to the tutor. So yeah, a few big benefits. Also, tutor buy-in and empowerment. It's a big deal. It does give tutors much more control over how the process works and its flow. And a lot of tutors are going to really appreciate that. I mean, they got into this to be a lot of them, to be more in control of the work that they do. They love tutoring, but they wanted independence from it maybe, and that can be a big selling point too. In terms of value proposition, it's similar to that of a platform service. It's actually like TutorCruncher, right? But TutorCruncher and employment agencies were facilitators in the same way that Uber is or Deliveroo is. And the value proposition in that kind of environment is support, access, and enablement. Like TutorCruncher is all software, so the software bit of it is all basically enablement. There are aspects of that that an EA company can learn from as well. The support as well, which you know what it is, it's someone there to answer your questions when you have them, both the tutors and the clients. And then access, so what's your database, who are you introducing them to, what can you arrange for them? And like that's a big core component of the service as well. So I think framing it within that frame kind of communicates what an employment agency is really good at. The employment business, yeah? So the disadvantages to EA, you lose control over to be fair, the disadvantages for the EA are more or less the advantages for the employment business, actually. So I'll run through these now. But employment business, economies of scale. So each tutor doing individual chasing of payments and invoicing is great, but also there might not be super efficient at it. And there is a reason why you've got one person doing accounting sitting down on a Monday morning and blasting through it, that like maybe they're just better at getting things done and more cost effective. That's one advantage of this alternative EB model. Prepayments are a big thing. You can't do prepayments, as we said earlier. We had that question about it doesn't really work with employment agency if you're using that split payments approach. And linked to that is the idea of strategic pricing and discounts. So you can charge up front, and I've spoken to several different companies now who've told me that because they made the switch to EB and started charging up front, that they increased their commitments at the start of term from customers between like 10 and 20%. So that's the increase in customer spend that they had on a termly basis just by taking up, because like it's easy to sell to someone in September the idea that their kid is going to do 3 lessons a week. By mid-November, I imagine people start having wobbles. But if you can get that commitment up front, it seems to really improve spend. And strategic pricing and discounts specifically, with an EA model, you can't, if we use that example we had earlier, you can't decrease the price by 30%. Because you only like own 20% of the price. The other 80 is coming from the tutor, and you can't manipulate that. It's the tutor who's setting that rate and charging it. So if you want freedom over, maybe you have a referral scheme, and you want to give someone an incentive that it's half off for the first X number of lessons if they refer a friend. That's easier to implement if you're an employment business than it is if you're an EA. Schools and local authorities, if you're providing services to local authorities, they don't really care about the cost stuff, the VAT that we talked about, because it's not relevant to them anyway. So in that case, rather than it being 120 versus 104, it's just £100 in either case. So they're fine with either. And they probably want more control because local authorities tend to be a bit sticky about like, we need things done in such a way and the invoices have to be formatted this way and we want attendance reports and all. That's easier when you're in full control of the services provided. And the value proposition here is user experience. Again, you have full control over it. So you can make it super consistent and as simple as possible. They're not multiple invoices from multiple tutors if that's who they're working with. And process-led offerings. I'll get into that a little bit later on. The Americans love this kind of stuff, but because you are providing the service, again, you have more freedom to dictate exactly what that service is going to be and how it's going to be provided, rather than if you just facilitate a tutor, you have less direct control over that. So yeah, managed and centralized services, they're your competitive advantage. That's what you can lean on. You can spec into the managed aspect of that example company, the old way company that we looked at earlier. And hybrid model, I mostly have this here to refer to the fact that you can do both. So you can operate as an EA and an EB on different kinds of clients. Local authorities are one example where you might want to have your local authority work treated as though you're an EB and your private clients as EA because they benefit from the cost reduction. So the benefits of that are fairly obvious. Local authorities get the curated services and you can offer those when you choose to offer them. Private clients pay lower rates and you still have the freedom to employ that an employment business has. So for example, if you're running a physical tuition center with tutors working long hours, you might want to employ people because you might want things like notice periods and commitments. So the value proposition is absolutely flexibility and accommodation. You can build up a bit of a network effect of like catering to multiple different tutors and multiple different subsectors. Be a hub for all different kinds, whether it's schools or private. The difficulty is the complexity scales very quickly. So you're going to want a good system and very clear communication. I'll talk about this a little bit later on as well.
So we running two programs alongside each other? EA and EB?
Yeah, so you can decide on whatever basis you like, either a per client basis or maybe a per tutor basis, how you act. Are you going to act as an employment agency or act as an employment business on that particular charge? So it's kind of just a combination of the two models that we've been speaking out already. Sorry?
The government's fine.
Yeah, I'm going to try to steer clear of the words. The government's fine with that. Sorry? Yeah. So again, I'll refer you to TTA for the general. Is it like, does it comply? Is it legitimate? All that kind of stuff. My understanding is a lot of the companies we have will operate this kind of hybrid model, especially, as I said, for local authorities. Another use case is if you run like physical tuition center, but you have online or remote on the side, you might employ the tutors who work in the center, but have self-employed tutors who do the like lower hour work outside of that. For the employed tutors, well, you can't act as an employment agency, you're not allowed. But you might want to on the online stuff. So that would be another example where you could have those two running simultaneously, and that should be fine. So software tools being used to complement those business models that I just ran through. So the employment agency model, some of the stuff here is carried across from the last slide. So we are looking towards identifying ourselves as like a platform service, and the goals are support of the people involved, access to tutors, to clients, and enabling the service itself. So the tools being deployed, I already mentioned split payments, so that's splitting the payment on the transaction, which kind of facilitates a lot of this stuff. Self-service booking, I put the little asterisks on here for something that Americans love, that it's traditionally, people in the UK do not like self-service. Like we said, the traditional model has been very hands-on and curated, and there's still a big attachment to that. But I've spoken to a lot of people who are moving towards this EA model, who I think as they're beginning to reframe themselves as we're just the facilitators, we're the platform, we just introduce you and connect you to the people who provide the service, that they're leaning more into self-service booking. So client logs into their account, they see a list of tutors or maybe a list of like courses that are offered, they choose the times that suit them, and then they happen in the background. I have warned in the past about like people trying to over-automate this stuff, but generally speaking, I don't think there's probably an issue we face in the US more than over here. I think people are still kind of just slowly moving towards that, that idea of service provision. Similarly, and this would kind of fall under the category of enablement that we have up here, an on-platform chat service. So if you want to enable or facilitate clients and tutors and students kind of communicating and talking to each other, this is something we plan on launching in the next 3 months or so. But you want to make it easier for them to talk to each other. Specifically in that case as well, it lends itself to conversations about things like safeguarding. So rather than having to exchange contact information, you have a system on your platform which allows them to communicate, but allows you to have oversight, and we kind of have some automatic filters on it for things like catching any inappropriate content. And the big thing here as well, and as I said, like I think access is a real core offering of this employment agency model, is the database management. And there are software tools which are relevant to this, like you want a good CRM or customer relationship management software. And in terms of features that you want to look for in something like that, the ability to edit the information fields, to write your own information fields that you can store is an important one. A degree of integration with your other services, other things that you use so that system can talk to other systems easily be relevant. A good labeling system. But honestly, ultimately, and I experienced this issue myself just like in our own business in TutorCruncher, is that it's just like rolling up sleeves and really digging into the database that you have, cleaning it out. I know that we have a tendency to, we'll stack up 100 labels that mean very slightly different things in very slightly different circumstances. And I think a lot of keeping a cleansed, interesting, effective database of both tutors and clients is just about managing that and viewing it as, like, that is, to a very large extent, you're offering your products, right? So the more effectively and succinctly that information is stored, then the more effective it's going to be when you're able to introduce tutors to the list of clients that you have that fall into X, Y, or Z criteria, or vice versa. If I talk now about the employment business model, so as we said, we're looking to prioritize user experience, consistency, and simplicity. Process-led offerings, I'll talk about them a little bit more now. As I said, asterisks, Americans love them. It's something you never see over here, really. But in the States, tutoring companies will very frequently identify themselves around a particular kind of teaching method. So, like, an example is what they would call Russian math, is like a technique for teaching mathematics that they used in the Soviet Union, apparently. I'm not going to be the one who tells you all the details about it, obviously, but it's like understanding the whys of mathematics as opposed to the hows. But you get tons of tutoring companies identifying themselves around that teaching method or that rubric, and that's their brand. That's what they go to clients with, and that's easier to think about from an employment business perspective, because in this model, you are the one providing the service. Like, it's your company, it's your service, and so you can brand it and frame it and customize it in a way that you have more direct control over it, as opposed to just being the facilitator for the tutor who is independent. It's not that you couldn't offer suggestions and offer teaching materials to tutors that you want to encourage them towards, but if you want to say, no, this is top down, we decide what gets covered on our particular curriculum, you have more options for that with employment business. And so maybe some of those process-led offerings are, I've seen a few of them now in the UK beginning to start up. It's still in its early stages, but in terms of the actual tools being deployed, online classrooms and whiteboards. Now, again, it's not that an employment agency can't pay for or facilitate for a whiteboard or classroom for tutors. Again, though, the framework, the mindset, is that it is the tutor's service, so it is up. They have a choice. It is their choice, their determination as to which of these they use. You can be a little bit more centralized with your provision if you're acting as an EB. Similarly, like we said, with the process-led offering stuff, you can specify learning materials and lesson plans, referral discounts and codes that I mentioned before. You want some kind of way of tracking those, whether it's assigning credit to someone's account. Maybe you want a field on the website where they put in a referral code that they got from their friend who recommended them. You get people to share their ID numbers or something so that it comes in on your inquiry form and you say, great, this is who I give the credit to because they've recommended this person to me. Prepay lesson packages, another thing they love in the US, that has taken off here much more already, but definitely employment business is encouraging people down that road a lot more in the last couple of years. So the idea is here, often it's framed as a company sets up a series of packages, 10, 20, 40 hours. That's all paid for in the beginning of September when a client first commits, and you give some incentive to paying in larger bulk amounts. So it all goes on as credit on the account, and then it's used across the term, and maybe they can just buy that online, or you have a plug-in for the website, or whatever you might want to do. And local authority specific tools. So we have some of these have also been requested separately. As I said, local authorities are often very pernickety about exactly how they want people to work with them. So that can include things like separating invoices on a per student level, or collating them in particular ways. Good attendance reports, like percentage attendance, and like easy access to that data. It's LAs are tricky, and each one seems to have very slightly different requirements to each other one. So there's probably more than can be gone through, but tool being deployed for it, I suppose. In terms of hybrid, as we said, it's a combination of the two business models mostly. So I won't go into most of the tools that are used for this, or the tools that are used for the other things, just in a 50-50 split or whatever the split is. The real tool, as I said, hybrids get very complicated. So you need clear communication. It could be that it's the local authorities are treated as employment businesses and private clients are treated as employment agencies. But that's one way, and that's a certain level of complicated because tutors have different processes for interacting with each one. There's one in which they control the invoicing process and one in which they don't, and already messaging is getting a bit fuzzy there. The other way that we spoke about, where some tutors are employed and you have to act as EBs with them, and some tutors are self-employed and you want to act as an EA. That's more complicated again because now you've got clients who might be dealing with two tutors, one of whom is employed and with whom you're working as an EB, and one of whom is self-employed and with whom you're working as an EA, which is confusing from a client perspective because they don't always understand the ins and outs of this. So clear communication, whether it's video guides, written guides, like I always recommend a one-pager for tutors on how you kind of expect them to interact with the system as you've got it set up. Email broadcasts, just like mass emails out or dashboard alerts to let people know when they log into the management system or whatever you might have for them, that about some kind of process or links to documentation that you've prepared for them or anything like that. So yeah, in summary, basically, we've got our three models as described. Rough model for how employment agencies or companies who define themselves mostly as employment agencies, how they tend to work and tend to frame the services that they provide. And in that case, we're talking about reduced admin workload, increased profit margins, and a lot of independence and empowerment for tutors. We're talking our middle option, employment business. A big aspect of that is having the freedom to do things like prepayments and package discounts, referrals that we mentioned. And those prepayments and package discounts, from what I've heard in many cases, have prompted clients into 10 to 20% higher spend on a termly basis. And those hybrid models, you have a wider suite of tools available that you can draw on. And you got a lot of features catering to a diverging market. So you can span a broad range there, but it just comes with the cost of complexity that we mentioned. And I should say, these are just some typical examples of the ones we've seen. The examples that I've gone through here, they're descriptive rather than prescriptive. So these are just what I see people using. Don't necessarily use that as a rule book for exactly how you should operate. Like, for example, we have quite a few people now, actually, who operate as employment businesses but still use our split payments just because they want to eliminate payroll. And there's no reason why you wouldn't. Split payments has been designed for employment agency stuff, but if you can benefit from something that a lot of employment agencies are using and also maintain a lot of the benefits of an employment business, then a lot of people have gone in that direction as well. So don't necessarily take all your cues for it. But yeah, that's it. That's mainly what I wanted to run through. If anyone else has any other last questions before we close out. Yeah, Wesley?
How are you guys seeing the balance of your clients? Are they, 50-50, or what's it? Is it 1-1-1, or is it far more EAs and far more EAs?
So when enforcement first came into place, if you remember from the it came into force on January, I think that was January 2022, right? And the prior December, November had seen a lot of changes in people's public understanding of what they had to do in order to be adherent to the new EA legislation. That spooked a lot of people. As a result, I think we saw much less people initially take up the employment agency model and stick on employment business. Even then, it was about 50-50, I'd say. Since that point, people have slowly moved back on towards EA, so we're probably to about like 70-30 now. at least among VAT registered companies. Not that you couldn't or shouldn't be thinking about this stuff when you're not VAT registered. 70 EA. Yeah, so people have moved back to EA as they are more comfortable now that they understand the workflow. They're less scared of like making these big changes at what was at the time certainly very last minute.
And financial payments, so if you've got clients or the tutoring companies, people abroad, what is the payment method people are using majority? Is it through HSBC or split or what?
So certainly our split payments tool operates through Stripe, so it's mostly card payments. We can also split payments that are made via bank transfer, kind of through Stripe as well. So I won't get into the details of it, but it's a client is given unique bank transfer details, and then we assign them to a particular invoice and reconcile and then split it. Yeah. Oh yeah.
This is a really good question. You mentioned that you're going to launch new chat functionality.
Yeah.
Are those be just one-to-one or one-to-many?
So I'm not sure the mechanics of group chats. One idea that was floated where if you're familiar with jobs, that like jobs might be able to speak to each other. I think the main idea is one-to-one and only with people you're connected to on jobs, but I don't know that all the details have been worked out yet. Yeah, and then...
Will you be doing your annual reveal of average prices and which subjects are most popular?
Yes, you beat me to the punch there. So we have some information on that we calculate based on our users. What are the average prices for lessons, pay for tutors, that kind of thing. So we've calculated some of that. We also have done some surveys that some of you may have noticed over the last 6 months about 2 tutors directly and 2 company owners, about the hours. In case of tutors, we had some interesting stuff on the number of hours they were working on a weekly basis, agencies worked with, all that kind of stuff, and some priorities that the agencies had. My colleague Gabe down the back with the grey pullover on, he's taken names and email addresses on the way out the door. So if you want to stick your name on the list for us sending that to you, just pop your email there to Gabe and he'll jot it down. Fantastic.
With regards to the launching of the chat,
Mhm.
are you going to, because at the moment, from what I can see, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't send an email to every, to individual people without going in. You can't go and select multiple email addresses. So for example, if you wanted to email all of the students related to one tutor, you have to go in and do it one by one. You can't select them all. Is that something that could be looked at in?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I won't have the read on exactly how the chat is going to work. As I said, we did float group stuff, especially as you mentioned, like everybody on a job. I'll have to check that with our admin team and see what their plans are for us.
Emails to the parents. So for example, we recently had a tutor who decided to leave at very short notice. We wanted to just select all of their related students so
Yeah.
that we could go, because due to circumstances they weren't going to be in contact with the parents anymore.
Yeah.
But instead of us being able to just go name by name and just doing one email and it all blind copy all the parents in, we had to go in and write it
Yeah. What might help with that as well is I've been talking to a few people about it today. A plan for a revised version of broadcasts where we have much deeper level of filtering.
Yeah.
So again, it will depend on how we offer that filter. I'm sure if you're familiar with documents, I don't mean to get into a big TC thing, but if you're familiar with documents, you can set the access permissions. If you had something like that, but for broadcasts, that might do the trick for what you're looking for. No problem. All right, we should probably get a move on out of here because I imagine there'll be something going on in the main hall. But yeah, thank you for listening, everybody. I hope you found it interesting.